I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch network. We've previously reported how, in connection with Special Counsel Jack Smith's criminal investigation into Donald Trump's 2020 election interference, Jack Smith met with the Secretary of State of Michigan, Jocelyn Benson. That meeting took place a few months back in March, and the discussions, according to sources familiar, and Jocelyn Benson touched upon the threats directed at Benson personally for certifying election results, as well as the broader scheme by Donald Trump and his allies to try to overthrow the free and fair election across the country, but there specifically in Michigan. Now we are learning that Special Counsel Jack Smith had meetings with other Secretary of States, or in the instance of Pennsylvania, the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. According to a new CNN report back in March, Special Counsel Jack Smith's team met with the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Al Schmidt, who used to be the Philadelphia City Commissioner, testified before the January 6th committee about how the baseless conspiracy theories directed at him personally by Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani led to personal death threats. More on that in a moment. And back in March, Special Counsel Jack Smith also met with the New Mexico Secretary of State, Maggie Toulouse Oliver, about her experiences with election interference by Donald Trump and his allies in the state, the threats that were made against her and other election officials for simply administering a free and fair election. So if you're keeping score here, we know that Special Counsel Jack Smith met with the Secretary of State, a Republican from Georgia, Brad Raffensperger. We know that Special Counsel Jack Smith met with the Secretary of State from Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, a Democrat. We now know that Special Counsel Jack Smith met with the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Al Schmidt, a Republican. Interesting note on Al Schmidt. In Pennsylvania, he was actually appointed by Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro, a friend of the MeidasTouch network and the MeidasTouch podcast. But just an interesting thing, right, that the Democrat appointed a Republican, because this is about our democracy, and placed somebody who accurately counted the votes in Philadelphia in that position. And finally, number 4, Maggie Oliver, Secretary of State of New Mexico. So those are some of the Secretary of States we are aware of that Special Counsel Jack Smith met with. Here's the CNN report. Exclusive: Pennsylvania, New Mexico Secretaries of State interviewed as part of Special Counsel's 2020 election interference probe. Federal prosecutors have interviewed the Secretaries of State for both Pennsylvania and New Mexico in recent months as part of an ongoing investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The interviews, which have not been previously reported, indicate that Special Counsel Jack Smith is focused on the actions taken by former President Donald Trump and his allies in 7 key battleground states as they sought to upend President Joe Biden's electoral victory. Pennsylvania Secretary of State Al Schmidt met with prosecutors working with Smith in March. One source said Smith's team had sent subpoenas to local and state officials in all 7 of the key states: Georgia, New Mexico, Nevada, Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, that were targeted by Trump and his allies, and where Trump's campaign convened the false electors, the fake electors, as part of the effort to subvert the Electoral College. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger also met. And then the article goes on to say how Special Counsel Jack Smith also met with Maggie Toulouse Oliver, New Mexico's Secretary of State. Here is the video of Al Schmidt, now the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who was serving as the Philadelphia City Commissioner in 2020, administering the election in Philadelphia at that time, certifying the results there. This is what Al Schmidt told the January 6th committee about there being no evidence at all of 8,000 dead voters, one of the MAGA Republican lies. Play the clip.
Not only was there not evidence of 8,000 dead voters voting in Pennsylvania, there wasn't evidence of 8. We took seriously every case that was referred to us, no matter how fantastical, no matter how absurd, and took every one of those seriously, including these.
And here is Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Al Schmidt, recalling the horrifying and violent threats made against him and his family. Play the clip.
The threats prior to that tweet, and on some level it feels almost silly to talk about a tweet, but we can really see the impact that they have, because prior to that, the threats were pretty general in nature. Corrupt election officials in Philadelphia are going to get what's coming to them. You're what the Second Amendment is for. You're walking into the lion's den, all sorts of things like that. After the president tweeted at me by name, calling me out the way that he did, the threats became much more specific, much more graphic, and included not just me by name, but included members of my family by name, their ages, our address, pictures of our home, just every bit of detail that you could imagine. That was what changed with that tweet.
Behind me are redacted threats that you received, that you provided to the committee. Now, we redacted portions of the text to protect your family. Mr. Schmidt, I think I speak for all of my colleagues when I say we are deeply sorry for what you and your loved ones have been through. And I also want to thank you for your service to your country and for standing up for the rule of law.
And you can see here the text messages that he received. You lied, you a traitor, perhaps 70 cuts and 20 bullets will soon arrive. Rhino stole election, we steal lives, Q, you betrayed our country. You know, and you should know too that Donald Trump posts, that's QAnon right there. Donald Trump posts QAnon memes almost every day on his social media platform. I know large media networks like to ignore that takes place. We cover that every single day, every time he does it. We talk about the QAnon post because it is a death cult, and he is encouraging his death cult to engage in conduct like threatening people's lives and actually acting on it. Here's another one that Al Schmidt's family received. Albert Rhino Schmidt committed treason. By the way, you see, they use the language that Donald Trump uses in his social media post, and they go, Rhino Schmidt, your husband should tell the truth, or you're basically threatening the lives of his wife and his children. This is an interview between Rachel Maddow and Maggie Toulouse Oliver, New Mexico Secretary of State, where she confirmed, this was from about June of 2022, where she confirmed that she's going to refer some of these rogue city commissioners who wouldn't certify the results and who participated in trying to interfere with the free and fair election to the Attorney General for prosecution. Play the clip.
I will note that you raised the prospect in the press release announcing that you were taking this writ to the Supreme Court over this matter. You raised the prospect that there could potentially be a criminal referral to the state attorney general's office in terms of these county commissioners violating their oaths of office. When one of these commissioners sort of laughed off the prospect of complying with a court order here, saying, what are you going to do, put me in prison? I think she thought that was a ridiculous prospect, but it sounds like that might not be a ridiculous prospect.
I don't think it is ridiculous. We are making that referral to the Attorney General. This commission has taken a number of unlawful actions over the course of the last couple of weeks. They took a vote, which is ultimately symbolic, but to ban the state certified voting systems in their county. They took a vote to remove certified monitored containers to receive absentee ballots or mail-in ballots, which is also counter to state law. And then they ordered or were attempting to order a hand recount of the results. And none of those are provided for in state law. Now, mind you, the irony of this entire situation is that if they certify the results, there are a number of processes that can then take place, and particularly for candidates who may have questions about the outcome of the election. We can undertake recounts, we can undertake rechecks of the voting system, but unless and until this commission in their capacity as the canvassing board does their mandatory duty, we can't do any of that. And so we have made that referral, or we're going to be making that referral shortly. And quite frankly, criminal prosecution is on the list, as well as removal from office for these commissioners who are violating the law.
Wow. New Mexico Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver, I'm sure you never anticipated your duties as Secretary of State requiring this kind of action, but here you are. Thank you very much for helping us understand it tonight. Please stay in touch with us about this story as it moves forward.
Indeed. Thank you, Rachel.
And also after the January 6th insurrection, towards the end of 2021, I believe it was in about October of 2021, numerous state and local election officials met before the Senate Rules Committee. Jocelyn Benson was one of them. Also, you had now Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Al Schmidt, and you had, for example, then Secretary of State Katie Hobbs of Arizona, now Governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs. I'll play this clip. This was on Rachel Maddow back from October of 2021 about the testimony provided then by Secretary of State Katie Hobbs and then Philadelphia Police Commissioner Al Schmidt. Play the clip.
Well, today, the Rules Committee in the Senate heard from election officials who laid out in detail the threats they personally have faced this year. Here's two of them. Arizona's Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, she's a Democrat, and Al Schmidt on the right side of your screen. He's a city commissioner and a member of the Board of Elections in the great American city of Philadelphia. Mr. Schmidt is a Republican.
As the lawsuits mounted, so did the threats against me and other election officials. Orange jumpsuits were mailed to county supervisors. There were armed protesters outside of my house. I had to have 24-hour security. But what concerns me more is the near constant harassment faced by the public servants who administer our elections. Nearly every day, they are on the receiving end of abusive phone calls and emails.
My experience isn't unique. My colleagues and staff receive threats. Nearly 1 in 5 election officials now list threats to their lives as a job-related concern. I am a Republican. For doing my job, counting votes, I'd like to quickly share with you some of the messages sent to me and my family. Tell the truth or your 3 kids will be fatally shot. Included our address, included my children's names, included a picture of our home. Cops can't help you. Heads on spikes, treasonous Schmidts. You betrayed your country. You lied. You're a traitor. Perhaps cuts and bullets will soon arrive at, provides my address, names my children, Rhino stole election, we steal lives. There are additional threats that my family asked me not to share today because they are so graphic and disturbing. No matter what our party affiliation, this is not okay.
This is not okay. Republican Al Schmidt from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia, announced actually at this hearing today that he himself will not run for re-election when he's up again in 2023. He described the torrent of threats as, quote, domestic terrorism. He said the whole point is to terrorize, to intimidate, and to coerce. And it's not just sort of top-level elections officials, including elected officials themselves in charge of administering elections, who have been suffering. The threats and the lies are also having a detrimental effect on poll workers, on regular everyday citizens who volunteer their time and effort in order to keep our democracy chugging along.
So Special Counsel Jack Smith's criminal investigation into Donald Trump's 2020 election interference has a number of prongs. There's the day of the insurrection itself, aiding and abetting the insurrection, potentially seditious conspiracy, obstructing an official proceeding. Then you have the fake elector scheme whereby Donald Trump's MAGA Republican allies in certain states, it was coordinated because it happened in all of those states that I talked about earlier in the video, affixed their names to fake electoral certificates, sent it to be counted on January 6th that said Donald Trump won states that actually then candidate, now president, Joe Biden won those states. Special Counsel Jack Smith's looking into wire fraud, money laundering, campaign finance violation charges against Donald Trump's political action committees. There's also threatening state and local election officials as part of the investigation. And also, in some states, Donald Trump's had individuals steal election data. One key example is in Coffee County, Georgia, where a MAGA Republican who was the head of the Republican GOP of Coffee County let in these people working for Trump, and they took election data, caught on surveillance footage, and then they manipulated the election data, just literally stealing election data. So those are the different prongs. And then I think substantively these secretaries of state, or in the case of Pennsylvania, the Secretary of the Commonwealth, ultimately helps, one, with their personal stories actually being threatened. And these are, top officials in the state, so they make very compelling witnesses from a structural planning standpoint of which witnesses would you want to put before a jury? I mean, the Secretary of State, especially where it's bipartisan and you've got Republicans and Democrats, that's a powerful presentation right there. They'll tell their own stories about receiving threats. They can talk about how there's absolutely no fraud capable of overturning the election, and that was so obvious to them. And then they'll talk about how the various crimes that they observed, the fake elector scheme, and other criminal conduct regarding election interference. So there you have it. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 1.5 million subscribers thanks to your support. Check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Wherever you get audio podcasts, subscribe to the MeidasTouch podcast, and have a great day.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.